What if the things you fear most don't just exist in your nightmares, but right here, in the darkness of your own room? These are not just dreams, they are real stories of sleep paralysis that blur the line between the living and the dead. Stay with us as we count down the top 10 most horrifying encounters. But be warned, you might not sleep tonight. Number 10. The Silent Intruder. It was a quiet night in Sydney when a young woman named Sarah experienced her first brush with terror. She woke up paralyzed, her body frozen like a statue. Her eyes scanned the room, and that's when she saw it. A shadowy figure standing in the doorway. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it started walking toward her. She tried to scream, but her voice was trapped inside her. The figure bent over her, its face shrouded in darkness, and whispered in her ear, "You're not alone." The next morning, she noticed scratches on her doorframe, as if something had been trying to claw its way in. What haunted her more was the faint smell of sulfur lingering in her room. Experts call it sleep paralysis. But Sarah? She calls it a visitor. Cliffhanger. What would you do if the next time you opened your eyes, someone, or something, was watching you? Number 9. The Suffocating Presence. Carlos, a 25-year-old man from Brazil, had always heard stories about sleep paralysis but never believed them, until it happened to him. One humid summer night, he woke up with an unbearable weight on his chest. He couldn't breathe, and his arms and legs felt pinned to the bed. That's when he saw her, a woman in a tattered white dress with long, tangled hair. She sat on his chest, staring into his eyes with hollow black sockets. He swore he could feel her cold, bony fingers pressing into his ribs. Then she leaned in close and whispered, "You'll never wake up." When he finally broke free from the paralysis, he found bruises on his chest, shaped like fingerprints. Well, he tried to convince himself it was just a bad dream, but he hasn't slept peacefully since. Cliffhanger. What if you woke up one night and realized the bruises on your body didn't come from a dream? Number 8. The Crawling Entity. A 19-year-old student from India described her encounter as the most horrifying experience of her life. She woke up to a faint scratching sound above her bed. Unable to move, she tilted her eyes upward and saw a pale, gaunt figure crawling on her ceiling. Its joints bent the wrong way, and its head twisted at an impossible angle to look down at her. As it began crawling toward her, its long, bony fingers left claw marks on the ceiling. It stopped just above her and let out a high-pitched, ear-shattering scream. Suddenly it dropped, landing right on top of her. She blacked out from fear, only to wake up the next morning with 3 deep scratches on her shoulder. She still hears scratching sounds some nights. Cliffhanger. Could you ever close your eyes again knowing that something might be crawling above you? Number 7. The Shadow Children. A young man in London woke up one night and noticed several small shadows standing by his bed. They looked like children but had no faces, just dark, featureless voids where their eyes and mouths should be. He tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come out. Suddenly, one of the children leaned over and whispered, "We've been waiting for you." As he lay there, frozen in terror, the other shadows began climbing onto his bed. They grabbed his legs and started pulling him toward the edge. Just as he thought he would fall into some endless abyss, he regained control of his body and sat up. But the handprints of the shadowy children remained on his bedsheets. Cliffhanger. What if the shadows in your room aren't just shadows, but something waiting to take you? Number 6. The Grinning Man. A woman in Chicago experienced a nightmare that blurred into reality. She woke up to find a man standing in the corner of her room. He was tall and impossibly thin, with a face stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. His teeth were jagged, and his eyes seemed to glow faintly in the dark. As she lay frozen, the man began to approach her, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. He leaned in close to her face, his grin widening even further, and said, "I've been here all along." When she finally snapped out of it, her mirror was shattered, as though someone had punched it from the inside. Cliffhanger. Could the man with the terrifying grin be closer than you think, watching and waiting for your next sleepless night? These stories are chilling, but we're only halfway through. If you're captivated and want more spine-tingling tales, please subscribe, because hitting your subscribe button can give me new motivation to work harder and succeed. Let's continue into even darker territory. Number 5. The Whispering Voice. An elderly man in Canada shared his chilling story. He woke up to the sound of a voice whispering his name. It wasn't just in his head. It was as though someone was standing right next to him. The whispers grew louder and more frantic, repeating his name over and over. Suddenly, he felt a hand grab his arm, and the voice hissed, "Come with me." When he regained control of his body, he saw a red mark on his wrist like a burn. The mark didn't fade for days. Even now, he hears the whisper when he's alone at night. Cliffhanger. What would you do if you heard someone calling your name when no one else was around? Number 4. The Mirror Demon. A young woman in Tokyo woke up facing her bedroom mirror. She could see herself lying there, motionless, but behind her reflection stood a dark figure. It had no eyes, but its mouth twisted into a horrifying smile. Suddenly, the reflection moved on its own, even though she couldn't move at all. The figure leaned down and whispered something into her reflection's ear before vanishing. When she finally woke up, her mirror was cracked, and the words, "I'm still here," were faintly written in the condensation. She never sleeps facing a mirror anymore. Cliffhanger. What if your reflection wasn't just mimicking you, but hiding something sinister? Number 3. The Screaming Shadow. A young man named David shared his encounter from a winter night in his remote cabin in Alaska. As he lay in bed, frozen in sleep paralysis, he noticed a tall, shadowy figure standing in the corner. At first, it was completely silent, but then it opened its mouth, though it had no face, and let out a scream so piercing that David swore it shook the walls. Even though he couldn't move, his ears felt like they would burst from the sound. The figure moved closer and closer with every scream, its form growing taller until it nearly touched the ceiling. Just as it seemed ready to engulf him, David snapped out of his paralysis, only to find his ears ringing and fresh claw marks on the wall above his bed. Cliffhanger. Imagine waking up, only to realize the screams weren't part of the dream, but echoing through your room. Number 2. The Laughing Demon. In Germany, a 34-year-old woman named Helena experienced a nightmare that felt all too real. She woke up to the sound of low, guttural laughter. As her eyes darted around the room, she saw a demonic figure crouched at the foot of her bed. Its skin was ash gray, its eyes glowing red, and its grin stretched impossibly wide, exposing rows of jagged teeth. The demon began crawling up the bed toward her, its laughter growing louder and more maniacal with every inch it moved. Helena felt its claws scratch against her legs as it whispered, "I've been waiting for this moment." When she finally woke up, she discovered deep scratches running down her legs and the faint scent of burning in the air. Cliffhanger. What if the laughter you hear in the middle of the night isn't in your head, but in your room? Number 1. The Endless Corridor. Finally, we arrive at the most terrifying story of them all. A man named Marcus from a small town in Ireland woke up paralyzed and found himself staring at the door of his bedroom. But the door was no longer closed. It led into an endless dark corridor that hadn't been there before. He could hear footsteps echoing down the corridor, getting louder with each passing second. Suddenly, a pale, skeletal figure emerged, dragging a long chain behind it. It pointed directly at Marcus and said in a hollow voice, "It's your turn." The figure began pulling him toward the door, and Marcus felt himself being dragged off the bed. When he finally broke free of his paralysis, the door to his room was wide open, and he swore he could still hear the faint sound of chains rattling. To this day, Marcus sleeps with the lights on and his door bolted shut. Final twist. Could it be that the figure wasn't just part of a dream, but something real, lurking in another dimension? And there you have it. The top 10 most terrifying sleep paralysis stories that make you question what's real and what's not. Which of these horrifying encounters left you stunned? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, by subscribing to this channel, you're not just supporting us, you're keeping the terrifying tales coming. So hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a story that will send chills down your spine. Have a topic you want us to cover? Drop your suggestions below, and maybe your idea will make it into our next video. Until next time, Sweet dreams.